No one's been paid. And the support you get is also from volunteers. No one is actually paid to do this. We are just helping each other have a better way of managing. While it may seem obvious, please consult your healthcare professionals regarding your diabetes management. And remember, this is an experimental form of therapy, and it's not approved by anybody. It is not a company. You download code off of the internet, and you take full responsibility for building and running your own system, and you do so at your own risk. So everyone put up your right hand, say, yes, I understand. There, good. So we have now about 400 members of SoCal Loopers, and they're no longer Southern California people. We have people from all over the world. We have people who are just waking up in Israel. We have people who are staying up all night in Ireland. It's pretty exciting. And it's just so we can share, we can help each other, and it's a great opportunity. The rules today, please keep yourself muted. We have a lot of people online today. We expect a few more, and there are people on Facebook. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that and putting the questions over to Gary. In the end, if we have time, we will do a Q&A. And after all of this, and we are streaming, by the way, after all of this, Gary has agreed to let us run this video. So if anyone has missed it or wants to listen to it again, it will be available. So online is my little team. You know about me. Glenn Weber has had type 1 for over 45 years. He's been looping since, I think, December.
August or September. September,
oh, long time. So wave to everybody. Cassidy Robinson's been a type 1 for 27 years. She's been looping for, is it 3 years?
Yeah, February 2018.
And Kenny Fox, waves Kenny. He is the father of a 6-year-old who's been looping for less than a year, or just about a year. She was diagnosed a year ago, January. You see us on SoCal Loopers on Facebook. You can ask questions. There's a sense that not all of us are learners by reading documents. A lot of us learn well or better by hearing it. And so we just give you the opportunity to hear it. And then we refer you to Loop Docs and to the Looped forums if you have very specific technical problems. Okay, so just between the 4 of us, that's 161 years of type 1 diabetes online, plus Gary, plus all of y'all. So this is a powerhouse of type 1. We are really fortunate. We get to hear Gary Scheiner today. Gary is a master's level exercise physiologist. He is a certified diabetes educator. For over 25 years. He's had type 1 diabetes for 33 years. He was Diabetes Educator of the Year for the American Association of Diabetes Educators in 2014. They have a new name, but I can't do it, so maybe he can. He's written 6 books, and I'm sure you're familiar with a book called Think Like a Pancreas, A Practical Guide to Managing Diabetes with Insulin, and it just came out with its 3rd edition. He is the owner and clinical director of Integrated Diabetes Services, a practice that's located outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, specializing in intensive insulin therapy and advanced education for children and adults. He's helped me, some of his staff has helped me, and they're available to do work by Zoom or Skype or whatever they're doing. He is also a fitness fanatic. He loves playing basketball, running, cycling, lifting, and he cheers on his sports teams. He has tried probably every closed loop that's available and out there. He has done reviews. He's an amazing expert on so many things diabetes, and we're just really very honored and fortunate that he's here today. So I'm going to turn this over to Gary and just soak it all up. You're going to learn a lot today. Thank you, Gary.
Just a legend in my own mind, according to you. Thanks for that introduction, Joanne. I'm on the East Coast, so it's about 8 o'clock here, but I heard that there were people in Europe and Asia and Africa who had logged in. I don't know if there's anybody from Australia. It's, I don't know, tomorrow in the middle of the day in Australia.
No, I don't think we have Australia. I'm not aware yet.
Last time I was there, and I had
I'm
a
from
call.
Australia.
My kids, yeah,
Oh, hey, welcome.
I'm from Adelaide in Australia. My name's Sean. Hey.
Adelaide's a beautiful city. I got to visit that, probably about 10 years ago. My kids were little when I was in Australia. So when I called them and I told them it was tomorrow, my son was 8 at the time, big sports fan like me, wanted to know if our team won that night. I had to explain it's not how it worked.
Hey, welcome.
I'm from Adelaide in Australia.
So did you have some questions from the group, or did you want me to just talk a little bit about?
Yeah, why don't you give us some of your thoughts or go-tos or how you counsel people on managing loop and exercise, and then we can go to questions, but they want your extreme wisdom.
I think one of the more important things with anybody who's using Loop, and I've been on it for almost 2 years now, is it's pretty important to get your pump settings right before transitioning over. You know, it's easy to say, yeah, Loop will compensate if things are off, but if it's constantly chasing rising and falling blood sugars, it's going to struggle. It's not going to give the same outcomes. So we try to take people still through basal testing, making sure their standard basal rates are correct. Try to make sure their insulin to carb ratios are proper, the correction factors, and so on. I feel like if you go into it with a solid foundation, you can build on top of that and really make a wonderful program for yourself. So going in, I think that's important. And even if somebody's on Loop, it's still, I think, worth making sure that your base settings are proper. And Joanne, we've walked you through that through basal testing and so on. And it really is helpful to get your settings right from the get-go. And that way Loop can just function that much better. The exercise part is, I think, a whole different thing. We try to teach people how to adjust their both bolus and basal and their carb intake to accommodate for what exercise does to them. And the same principles really hold true when somebody is using a system like Loop or any other hybrid closed loop system. In fact, I kind of tell people that they're better off going back to old school ways of managing exercise rather than trying to let their closed loop system manage their glucose during most of their workouts. I find there's some things about a hybrid closed loop that are great, like preventing delayed onset hypoglycemia. A lot of people see these delayed blood sugar drops hours after really rigorous, intense exercise. And the hybrid closed loops are pretty good at helping prevent that delayed drop because it's more of a subtle long-term change. And that's where these hybrid closed loops do a wonderful job. But when it comes to short-term issues like exercise can cause with either a rapid decline or a rapid rise, closed loop systems are almost helpless when it comes to things like that. You can set an override or make a quick adjustment within the app itself, but for the most part you still have to think. You have to make your own changes to prevent highs and lows.
Is it okay to ask questions now?
Yeah, go ahead.
If you can,
Okay.
if you put it into the chat, that way we can kind of control, because otherwise everyone will be talking at the same time. So
Yeah, or we can have you raise your hand and
Yeah.
I can unmute the person
okay,
that raises their hand.
I don't know how to.
You can ask your question first, since Gary said yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Loop is a nice meld of technology and being able to apply your own skill set. Other hybrid closed loops, like the Medtronic system, takes so much away from the user. it doesn't allow us to make the adjustments that we would often make on our own. I have to teach people to go out of auto mode on that system in order to manage themselves properly. With the tandem system, with their control IQ, it's a little bit better, but you can't do things like temp basals. You have to switch your entire profile around if you have to. Loop allows you to still apply a lot of your own adjustments on the fly, which I think is a really valuable thing. Loop is just, of all the closed loop systems, it's well thought out like none of the others. And yeah, it's certainly the most customizable of any of them.
Did
It
you
allows you to achieve the best outcomes. So
did you just
obviously
say
that's why the FDA.
did you just say it was more well thought out than the other ones out there?
Yes.
Interesting. I have a question for you just about getting your settings right. I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyway. Do you start looping and then get your settings right?
You can, but you have to go into open loop. You have to turn loop off if you're doing a basal test.
Okay.
You don't want loop adjusting things. You want to see if your standard basal settings hold you steady in a fasting state, whether it's overnight, morning, afternoon, or evening. You really want to see if your standard basal rates that you're working off of are doing the job correctly. And that job is just to offset the glucose that your liver's secreting through the day and night. If it's doing that, your blood sugar should hold fairly steady, not necessarily in a normal range, but if you start with a slightly elevated glucose, it should stay there. If you start in a tight range, it should stay there. That's how you know if your basal rates are set up properly.
So
But you can easily turn off loop temporarily. Let's say you want to check your afternoon basal setting to see if it's correct. You can eat breakfast, give your bolus, turn off loop at that point, and then just run on your standard basal settings the rest of the day until dinner time. You can see in the afternoon if things are holding steady. Overnight, you eat dinner, bolus, turn off loop, and then see if your glucose holds steady from bedtime to morning.
do you find that when you do your setting analysis, things change a lot?
They can. That's one of the reasons a hybrid closed loop system like Loop is so valuable, because even if you get your basal rates set about right, there are going to be days where it's not going to be right, where you're either more or less sensitive to insulin, or your liver's kicking out more or less glucose than usual. But we make an effort to at least get the basal rates in the ballpark. We want them pretty close to what your needs are. And that's where the fasting test comes in so valuable.
So just a question on that. We all know that life and diabetes varies by the day and sometimes by the hour. Is this a possibility? I mean, does Loop make up for all that variability?
Yeah, it will eventually, but it's not as good as having the right settings to begin with. What Loop will do is if you're starting to trend up or starting to trend down and it predicts you're going to continue in that direction, it'll make an effort to fix it. But we all know it doesn't fix it on a dime. It takes a while to bring that glucose back down. So in other words, if your settings are not correct, Loop is going to have to be chasing highs and chasing lows more often than it should be. If your settings are correct, it won't have to do as much chasing. So you can get pretty decent control on Loop, even if your settings are wrong, but you can really get exceptional control if your settings were right to begin with.
Do you find that the biggest factor is setting the basal, or are they all just equally important?
They're all important. The bolus settings are going to affect you in Loop or not in Loop. The basal settings are mitigated somewhat by how Loop adjusts things. But to really figure out your other settings, you got to get your basal rates figured out first. If your basal settings are incorrect, then your insulin to carb ratios are going to be wrong in order to achieve normal blood sugar. Your correction factors are going to be wrong because the basal is not set right. So you have to start with the basals, and then you can fine tune everything else.
Okay.
The other thing you have to figure out is your duration of insulin action. In Loop, we choose an insulin profile. We're not telling it how many hours specifically, but we can pick the profile, the insulin profile that matches how long our insulin really takes to work. Some people's insulin clears very quickly. And for them, you can use something like a FIAS profile. Other people, the insulin takes an ungodly long time to clear. And then you can use the John Walsh type profile. And for those who are in the middle, we can use the rapid acting adult or rapid acting child profiles if it's a little bit shorter than that.
And I have one more question, and then I'll let everyone else ask their questions. Have you pretty much stayed with master branch, or have you dabbled in the various other developmental branches?
Well, the one optional feature that I utilize quite a bit is the temporary override. So I haven't yet installed the branch that does automated correction bolusing. I'm looking forward to getting that. But I find the temporary overrides, that is critical, especially with certain types of workouts. The temporary overrides are just such a valuable tool. Otherwise, you might as well be back on a pump where you're at the mercy of what's going on in your life. You don't have any way of dealing with it. A temporary override lets you tell Loop, hey, Loop, you're going to need to ramp up the doses for a while, or you're going to need to ease back for a while based on your experience and your own expertise. So setting up temporary overrides, again, kind of separates, I don't want to say the men from the boys, but it's what separates people who get reasonable control from those who can really excel using Loop.
Could you take us through a normal day in Gary's life after you have or whatever you do when first thing in the morning, if you work out in the morning?
I don't. No, I work out. I'm not a morning person. I am not a morning person.
So you go through
My
your
wife's a morning person, and she's like Miss Happy in the morning, and it's just not me. My natural biorhythm gets going right about now. After dinner is when I think I actually wake up. I usually do my workouts in the evening, and it's a variety of things. It's different every night. Prior to coronavirus, I'd go to the Y, I'd play basketball, I'd lift, I'd run, stuff like that. Now I'm having to get creative with my workouts at home. Since I don't have a good set of weights here, I created my own, I call it my Neanderthal workout. I'm using stones and I'm using buckets of rocks of different weights and sizes for my strength training workouts. It looks like a total mess, but it gets the job done. I'll just put on Netflix for an hour and do my lifting workout while I'm doing that, or put on some good loud music. But I work out in the evening typically.
Okay, so
weekends are different.
You've had dinner, and then you wait whatever period of time, or you don't, and then how do you use overrides before, during, and after?
Usually 30 to 60 minutes after dinner. So see, I don't know if you can get this on screen or not, but I have an exercise override that I set that I'll turn on before dinner. And with my exercise override, my dinner bolus is reduced by about 50%. My basal deliveries are all reduced by 50%. I don't really change my target. I keep it at about 110. But by reducing the bolus and the basal, starting about an hour before the workout, I find my blood sugars during the workout stay within a pretty healthy range. Now, it'll change if my workout is pushed back. If it's 2 hours after dinner, that dinner bolus is going to be insufficient if I cut it by 50%. So it gets a little trickier. So for me, it's optimal to work out 30 to 60 minutes after a meal. Now, other people find they like to work out when there's as little insulin in their system as possible. So they'll do it, before a meal, and they might adjust the basal beforehand, but I find that's usually insufficient. If somebody's going to do a workout that lasts, let's say, 90 minutes or less, adjusting the basal is usually not enough to prevent a low blood sugar. They are going to need rapid acting carbs before a workout like that. Just reducing the basal it's not enough to cut it. It would be great if we could say, all right, between 7 and 8:30, my basal is going to be this, but we can't do that because the insulins we use take many hours to work. So even if we cut back an hour ahead of time, we still have old insulin that's working during that workout. Plus anything that we receive immediately before or during is working as well. So we don't have the ability to really just change the basal all of a sudden to a level we want. We can lower it in a subtle way, which helps. With prolonged workouts, basal adjustments can really help a lot. But I find with the typical 30 to 60 minute exercise session, basal adjustments typically are not going to help enough. Most people need some carbs with that. Early morning exercise is a different thing. Now, for people who exercise first thing in the morning, you often don't need to make the same adjustments that you'd make later in the day. Early morning when the body's producing these dawn phenomenon hormones that help us wake up, they also drive the blood sugar up. We usually don't need to adjust our insulin a whole lot if we exercise then. Many people find their blood sugar holds nice and steady when they work out or even goes up a little bit. But anytime later in the day, from mid-morning till nighttime, the adjustments are definitely necessary.
How long do you run your overrides?
The exercise override I have preset to run for 2 hours. So it goes about to the end of my workout. I mean, if it's not exactly to the end, it's not that big a deal. So that's the one I use for my traditional post-meal workouts, is that exercise mode. But I have another one that I have set for an endurance workout. So if I do get to go on a long bike ride or a long hike or anything like that, then I lower my basal a bit more, and I also raise the target. Because of the workout like that, I don't want to have to be stopping to eat constantly. So this way, it keeps me at a kind of a mid hundreds level, or around like 8 or 7 to 9 on millimole. It keeps me in range pretty well.
And how about after exercise? Do you find a lowered need for your basal for a few hours, depending on what the workout is?
If I wasn't on loop or on a closed loop system, yeah, certain workouts I'd have to cut my basal for a while after. Basketball used to always do that to me. If I play full court and I'm running for a couple of hours, I'd have to cut my basal back for the next 8 hours or so. I find the closed loop systems, though, do a nice job of handling that. If you experience this subtle decline for quite a while, it'll reduce your basal automatically if you start to go down, and prevent those lows from happening middle of the night or even into the next morning. And I see that with any hybrid closed loop. Even Medtronic and Tandem systems work pretty nicely to prevent the delayed drops. It's during the exercise session that the closed loop features are not quite as effective.
Okay, and so you leave your target pretty much the same. Do you have a single number target, or do you have a range?
I always set a single number target. And I felt that it's the most sensible thing to do, because everyone has an acceptable range. In my case, I like my blood sugars to be between 70 and 160. That's just my comfort zone. And everyone has their own comfort zone. And you really ought to pick a number that's pretty close to the center of your target zone. So I go with 110, or 110 to 110 as my correction range. But for people on pumps that allow you to set a range for the target, you're actually doing yourself a disservice by putting a range in, because it's going to correct you to the low end or to the high end, which kind of hurts your chance for success. It's like being an archer and not aiming for the bullseye. you're aiming for the edges of the target. And you're going to miss the target more often than not if you do that. So having one number in the middle of your acceptable range is usually the best way to go.
Oh, that's interesting. So, do you think you come to your range faster when you have a single number?
I don't know about faster, but your chances of being in your target zone are enhanced if you're aiming for the middle of that zone.
Okay. 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 Anybody want to start feeding some questions to Gary?
I
Yep.
would.
There's
Oh.
a couple of questions in the chat, and I think one of them is something that a lot of people are going through with exercise. I know I personally experience it all the time. So Rob wrote that once he started looping, when Rob runs or jogs, Rob lowers their basal, but starts dropping too much. So loop will lower basal to 0, and it'll stay at 0, right, while you're out of your target range. But then later Rob sees a high. So what are the suggestions for dealing with that? And I know, like, even just to kind of bounce off of it, that happens to me all the time. And the high is a serious high. Like, I can end a run and 30 minutes afterward, I'll be 300 when I was like cruising in like 75, 80 zone for a while.
It's a case of too little, too late. If you're about to start running or jogging or walking or whatever, and you lower your insulin delivery, it's not going to matter because the insulin you're getting from that point on isn't going to be doing anything in your body for at least another hour. You know, it takes a while even for rapid acting insulin to activate. Now, if you're using an inhaled insulin like Afrezza, you can make a more immediate effect. But the insulin you get from your pump at 2 o'clock is doing most of its work between 3 and 4. It's not really working at 2 o'clock. So that's why basal adjustments for relatively short bouts of activity don't work so well. You're better off either cutting the bolus beforehand or eating rapid acting carbs a little while beforehand. And I mean like 15 minutes or so. So an ideal situation from what you described from Rob, instead of touching the basal insulin on his pump, 15 minutes before running, take a look at your sensor and see where you are and where you're headed. If you're normal and level, you can probably calculate or estimate about how much carb you need for let's say a half an hour run. This charts, I mean, my book's got charts like that, but you can look it up elsewhere. You might need 20, 30 grams of carb just to keep your glucose stable for an event like that. And if you drink those carbs, that's better because it absorbs a bit faster. That'll give you better results than trying to mess with basal insulin. But if the run is taking place after a meal, you can cut the bolus back. And there you're going to have a more substantial impact. Instead of making a difference of a few tenths of a unit like basal does, you're talking multiple units of difference. And if you have food digesting, less insulin and activity, things have a tendency to balance out pretty well. Oh, and as far as the rise afterwards, yeah, that's something that happens to a lot of people when they're working out. Sometimes it occurs if you work out after a meal and your food is still digesting, it might sit in your stomach till the workout's over and then rises. In other cases, high intensity workouts like running, where you build up lactic acid, can actually cause some insulin resistance throughout your body after the workout. Working out at a lower intensity would help prevent the rise afterwards. Also, a prolonged cool down helps to kind of wash the lactic acid out of your muscles so that it doesn't accumulate and cause that rise after the workout's over. Some people also find they just have to give a small bolus at the end of their workout, knowing that the rise is coming. But if you do that, do it cautiously. If you normally rise 100 points after your workout, don't give enough insulin to offset a 100-point rise. Give enough to offset a 50-point rise, because the exercise is going to make your insulin work more efficiently. Even after the workout, your insulin does tend to work a little more efficiently. So giving half that normal dose would work well.
One of the things that anyone who's watching tonight and has been watching our other like SoCal Loopers Loop and Learns will know is that we ask a lot of questions about ISF and its impact. And I think one of the things we've been trying to explore offline is ISF and its use in exercise. So right with the run example that you just gave, have you played with, or do you have suggestions about, right? You're more resistant during that run and you are more sensitive after that run. So do you ever find that you're adjusting your ISFs based on exercise?
Yeah, it's a great question and point to bring up, Cassidy. And for anyone who's listening, ISF is your correction factor, your sensitivity. It's an assumption about how much 1 unit of insulin is going to drop your blood sugar. And what I recommend is, I mean, everyone's needs are going to be individualized, but while you're figuring this out, assume that your sensitivity is double before a workout and after a workout. So if your glucose is elevated beforehand, give half the usual dose to fix it. If you expect to rise a certain amount during the workout, because let's say it's anaerobic, or give half what you'd normally need to cover that rise. And post-workout, same thing. And if you're high after the workout, give half of what you would normally give to cover that high. And like anything in diabetes, it's about trial and adjustment. We never get it right the first time. You try it, you see what happens. If you give half the usual dose and you wind up high anyway, well, give a little more next time. If you drop too much, give a little less next time. It's just a fine-tuning process that we all have to go through. And it'll probably vary by workout, and it'll vary by time of day. It'll vary based on the weather and, you know, who's in first place in the central division. There's all kinds of variables that come in, and we don't have control over all of them. I was going to make a political comment, but I don't do it now. I made the mistake in one of our newsletters of making a comment about something Donald Trump said. I got such hate mail from people over that. I stay away from it now.
Your admins here are also trying to stay away from them as much as we can rein ourselves in.
It's mostly a California group you've got there, I guess. Maybe I can take a few more chances.
Glenn, do you have questions from the pre-submitted?
Okay, well, I'll do a couple of the pre-submitted questions. From Jessica, pre-policing for 3 hours, Taekwondo training on loops. Suggestions, loop advice for different kinds of exercise, like walking versus Taekwondo versus hiking versus scuba, etc.
There's a lot of customization that has to go into this, obviously. Something like Taekwondo, if it becomes competitive and you're sparring, it's very different than just running through drills, running through motions, and conditioning types of workouts. In general, the more aerobic and cardiovascular a workout is, the more of a glucose decline we're likely to see. And that's simply because we're not producing a lot of adrenaline and hormones that raise the blood sugar during those activities. The more anaerobic something is, like resistance training with low reps and high weight, competitive activities, then we're seeing more adrenaline production, more isolated muscle use, and the blood sugars tend to rise under those conditions. So everyone has to just learn how their body responds, but go into it knowing the more aerobic the activity is, the more of a blood sugar drop you're likely to see. The less aerobic it is, the less of a drop you're going to get, or maybe even a bit of a rise.
I have
doesn't actually answer
another
question,
interesting one here.
There is no answer to that question.
Yeah. So I have another interesting one. It's from a mother of a little looper. The question for Gary is, how soon before exercise should a 3-year-old looper cut off or cut down his insulin to be prepared? Is it right for an hour before or somewhere in between?
I like that little looper concept. I had a patient today, 4 years old, who's looping, doing great. Yeah, with a 3-year-old, young kids, insulin action curves are a little shorter than they are for most others. You know, their insulin may only last 2.5 to 3 hours. So the adjustments that you're going to make can be made a little sooner or a little closer. So 30, 45 minutes beforehand is reasonable for a very young child. Once kids get into that school age zone and teens, et cetera, then you're looking at trying to push the adjustments about an hour ahead.
There's a,
Yeah.
sorry, there's an interesting PDF that Mark Carmel just put up. So it's in the chat about the differences between aerobic, mixed, and anaerobic exercise and where the glucose trends are. So if you all want to just take a look at that or download it later. He's a CD and practice at USC with Ann Peters. Okay, I'm sorry, interrupted y'all.
Oh, that's great.
Okay. Along with the Little Loopers line, we got another Little Looper, one that's starting kindergarten next year. So the kindergarten schedule is different than pre-K schedule, meaning that some days the kindergarten goes PE lunch recess. Other days it just goes lunch recess. So what are the suggestions for tackling that?
Well, I guess it helps to know what PE is going to consist of. So this actually applies to kids of any age who have PE gym at school. They have a lesson plan. The teacher is always going to have a lesson plan. What are we going to be doing each session through the year? If it's archery week, you're probably not going to have to make a lot of adjustments. If it is track and field week, you're going to need to make major adjustments. You can always take rapid acting carbs prior to activity to prevent a blood sugar drop. And for a late morning type of a workout, that's generally the best approach. I'm sure the PE is not going to last more than, say, 45 minutes. So again, adjusting basal at that point, it's not worth it. It's not really going to help. You're better off just using your old school approaches. And if you're going to work out late morning, have some rapid acting carbs beforehand. If it happens to be a post-lunch activity, then you can make a bolus adjustment, whatever you calculate bolus-wise. And actually, I should say, put in less carb. That's one of the things about Loop is if you put in, let's say, 50 grams of carb, and it calculates that you need 5 units, but you only take 3 units, Loop is going to anticipate your needs are going to go up for the next few hours, and it might bump your basal up. You're better off entering less carb than reducing the bolus that Loop recommends. And that goes for just about any hybrid closed loop system, is adjust the carb amount so that you don't get the full dose that you normally would receive.
This is an interesting override question. And, I think that there's sometimes, over problems with our overrides, but let me just see what you say about this. I have an override for exercising at 10%, but I keep falling to below 70 sometimes and as low as 48. Can you explain why?
Well, 10% override. Now I'm assuming this is a 90% reduction.
Yes.
Because if you're only reducing things 10%, you might as well have not even changed it at all. Yeah, if you take your dose down to 10% of the normal level, you have to consider what your basal normally is at that time. A pump like the Omnipod physically can't split the dose to less than 0.05 units per pulse. So you may be receiving, if you're on a very low basal to begin with, it may not change it much, if at all, because of that. If you're on a reasonably high basal rate, now you're making a more substantial reduction. The timing, though, is key. If you reduce that dose right before you exercise, all of the insulin you got for the last 3 or 4 hours is now still working while you work out. So even though you made a major reduction, your insulin in your body while you're exercising isn't reduced by 90%. It may only be 10, 20, 30% reduced, which isn't enough. So the adjustment has to be made well in advance. Timing is key with everything we do with diabetes. And if you're going to adjust your dose to prevent a low while you work out, it's got to be made at least an hour ahead of time. If an hour isn't enough, do it 90 minutes or 2 hours ahead of time. eventually you'll find a combination of the timing and the magnitude of adjustment that'll work for you.
Can I ask a question?
No, not go ahead.
Okay, so am I not supposed to do this? Everybody's laughing.
Now go ahead.
Forget it.
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was laughing at Gary's reaction. That was so funny.
Works.
What do you got?
Sure, ahead, Debbie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I've only been looping since March, and I've been diabetic for 20 years. I became type 1 when I had my son 20 years ago, and I work out a lot. And so I'm trying to figure it all out, and Riley Loop has completely changed my life, and I can't even believe how amazing it is, but I work out a lot. And so I spin in the morning, and I'm trying to figure out, should I eat, should I not eat? And I've tried all sorts of different algorithms of that. And the thing that seems to work the best at this point is when I don't eat and I just jump on my bike and I don't do anything, and then all of a sudden Riley figures it out for me. Is that normal?
It works for you, then keep doing it. But yeah, like I said, working out first thing in the morning before eating, blood sugars will not respond the same way as they would if you work out later, like after a meal or later in the day. So doing that workout first thing in the morning with no bolus insulin present at all, you got a good chance that your blood sugar is going to hold steady. And I'll tell you a secret. The Riley link and Loop may have nothing to do with that. If you were running your normal basal rates, you'd probably see the same result.
Huh.
I'm going to unmute Ashley, who had her hand up and had a question about auto tune and whether you use that and any ideas on that. I think a lot of us have opinions on auto tune. So
Hi, this is Ashley, Central PA here. So yeah, I was just, I really was desperate to get auto-tune to work for me, just because my settings just seem like they're always changing. I don't know if it's hormones, and I do exercise a lot. I'm a big mountain biker, but I've switched to Control IQ recently. I'm kind of having similar outcomes as Loop, but I just wish there was like an auto-tune tool for these systems to help with setting adjustments. So thoughts?
Well, I'll tell you what there is. If you link your data up to and can visualize it on Night Scout, there's a feature in Night Scout called Loopalizer. Loopalizer takes, let's say, a week or 2 weeks of the adjustments that Loop has been making and plots it out. So we can see what phases of the day and night your basal insulin is being increased and decreased. It allows us to see if maybe your basals are off at those times, or the carb ratios aren't meeting your body's needs at those times. But generally speaking, Loopalizer it's just an analytic tool. Someone has to interpret it. And I think that's the case with any of this. If you work with somebody who can teach you how to self-analyze your data, that's a wonderful thing. A lot of people never look at their own data, which is all right. We deal with diabetes 24/7, and for a lot of us, the last thing they want to do is, well, I got some free time now, I think I'll look at my diabetes data. Most people don't like doing that. But again, there are people who do want to do that, and we'll teach you how to analyze your own data. But it also, if you don't want to make the effort of looking at your own info, find a clinician who can do that for you and offer you some valid input. And between Tidepool and Night Scout, we can do some good analysis of somebody who's on Loop and figure out how to smooth out some of the rough edges.
No, that's a good comment. And I have looked at Loopalizer in the past, and I've worked with your team too to analyze data. I don't know, it was just a real struggle for me to get Loop to work the way I wanted it to. So I might reach out again, because I might switch back for the summertime with Omnipod Loop. Thank you.
You also have to consider what your expectations are. You're not going to get 100% in range with any system. We have to have realistic expectations going in. Somebody who lives a very chaotic life may not be able to get as consistently tight control as somebody whose life is kind of boring and consistent all the time. People who snack a lot, who work out frequently, whose activity levels are changing constantly, stress levels are up and down. It creates challenges, and Loop can only do so much. Just like we as people with diabetes can only do so much. When you combine a motivated person who's skilled with a tool like Loop, we can do better than without it. But we're not going to get to perfection. And with most people, if you can get over 80% in range, get your average in the 120, 130 range, that's phenomenal. You've cut your risk of complications to almost zero. You're really at a low point there. And the beauty is we can do this with less effort than we used to have to put in before we had a tool like Loop. That's what's so wonderful about it.
Okay, we have an interesting question from Stacy. I'm curious about the dawn phenomenon and how you handle that. Do you recommend increasing basals, exercise, super boluses, or rage boluses?
I don't recommend rage bolusing. I do it myself sometimes, and it never works. But dawn phenomenon, it happens in most adults. The vast majority of adults need extra basal insulin in the early morning to offset some hormones that are being produced. And that's really the best and only way I would deal with it. I wouldn't try to prevent that blood sugar bump by getting up at 4:30 in the morning and exercising. That's when your body would be producing extra basal insulin. So if you really want to think like a pancreas, you need more basal delivery during those hours. But interestingly, not every adult gets one, and not every adult has it in the early morning hours. For some, it happens middle of the night. Others, it happens mid-morning. So that's why it's necessary to go through that basal testing, the fasting test, to see when and if yours occurs and what the magnitude of it is.
Okay.
Joanne, do you know offhand when your dawn phenomenon occurs?
I'm really not getting that at all. I get drops
I
from.
picked the wrong person.
You did. Ask somebody. Ask.
Because I have your ISF dialed in, Joanne.
Yeah, you do, Kenny. Yeah, I used to. I don't. It went away with probably during menopause. Thank God.
Penny and I determined that we start adjusting for mine at 4 a.m. because I'm a very classic case of dawn phenomenon.
Mine's a 4 a.m., 5 a.m. event. And what I don't really notice it too much because I'm on an auto bolusing branch. I let it fix it. But I do notice that if I eat earlier, I definitely have to give a little extra in the carb. I have to make my carb estimate high to overcome it.
Mine's between midnight and 4 a.m.
Mm.
That's when I need extra basal insulin. It's different for everybody. And we ran a study years ago analyzing basal profiles to see if they varied by age and gender. And we had about 280 different subjects in this, and no two people have the same profile. Everyone's needs are unique to them. So that's why it's necessary to go through the basal tests and get them set right. It just makes loop function, any closed loop functions, better if you're starting with the correct settings or close to the correct settings to begin with.
Okay, so from Laura, how do you figure out how to bolus on loop for low carbs, 25 net carbs, moderate fat, high protein, as there is a nice rise later on? Hard to figure out if you give instructions, can I do it? But hard to figure out if it's delayed. How do you manage low carb food?
Well, there's two issues there. One is the amount of insulin, the other is the timing. It's extremely important to pay attention to the time or the duration of your food. And don't just accept that 3-hour default every time you bolus for a meal. If you're having a slowly digesting meal, spread that out to 4 or 5 hours. If you're having a very rapidly digesting meal or snack, squeeze it to about 2 hours. You'll get better results that way.
Yeah, but with
Sorry, can I ask a bit more? Sorry, it's me that asked that question. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I'm also working out, so if I'm out of breath, I apologize. So like I do, like I kind of follow Dr. Bernstein at least a little bit as well, but I only eat twice a day. So I've always tried to figure out how like later on, because in Loop you can kind of do like a delayed, you can do like late entry carbs, right? So I understand what you're saying, but it's sometimes really hard how to figure out to bring that down that rise, because that carb to insulin ratio will be different for protein than it will be for actual like,
Well,
carbs, if that makes sense. So it's just so hard to figure it out.
There's a danger to entering the carbs or entering anything late, in that
Yeah.
if your glucose starts to climb and then you enter your food, you've kind of double covered the food, because your Loop is going to ramp up your basal quite a bit. And if you bolus for the food after that, you double treat and you wind up low. Protein will raise your blood sugar. That's something the Bernstein approach fails to take into account. If there's not enough carbohydrate in your overall diet, a portion of your protein is going to convert to glucose.
Yep.
So when you're eating very low carb, it's often necessary to add a percentage of your protein grams as carbohydrate.
Yeah, because
So,
right now I use that, what's it called? It's like a low carb branch of it. I can't even remember who did it. It was Robert Silvers that made it. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about right now? It's like an added on extension of it. Or what it does is it takes the research that says like you get a certain amount of carbs over, it like will add 1 carb per hour based upon the fat and the protein that you take within an algorithm. Does that make sense to you? If any idea what I'm talking about?
Fat doesn't convert to glucose, but it can cause some
No,
insulin.
it doesn't, but it can cause delayed highs though, right?
Yeah, that's different though. But if you're going to be bolusing for protein, you want to do a longer duration. So let's say you're having a cheese omelet and hardly any carb. You might figure, well, you got 30 grams of protein in this omelet. You need to bolus probably for about 15 grams, but don't do it for a 3 hour. Do it for a 4 or 5 hours. So, because it's going to take longer for that to kick in. And there's a million variables here, but in general, if you're eating very low carb, you should be using a longer duration for delivery than
100%.
the 3 hours.
But I guess my question is then how do you test that? Because if I want to test my settings and I want to try and figure that out, how do you just basically like eat them on a certain protein, then you take them out a certain amount of like insulin, obviously per Loop, and then figure that out and then figure out a trend? Because like I analyze my stuff all the time.
You'd go back and you'd look at the individual reports, go through all of your breakfasts and see what the post-meal pattern looks like. If your glucose is just rising modestly and then levels back into your target zone, it's great. You hit the bullseye. If you're spiking real high, you need to give more of the insulin earlier, so a shorter action. If you're dipping and then rising, you need to spread the insulin out more, or maybe even take a little bit less.
Yeah, because he advertised for like Humulog, right? Because of the insulin duration of insulin duration of that one. Because it's usually extended for a good low carb diet, I think is what he talks about. Anyways, okay, sorry, I will stop.
Hey, Joanne or Cassidy, could you address some of the Joanne or Cassidy, could you address some of the questions in the chat?
Oh, me?
What I think will be one of the easy ones for you, Gary, is what about suggestions for pre-exercise fast carbs?
Great.
Do you have a list? Do you have some items that we can Amazon ship to our COVID houses?
Think about what you would use to treat a low blood sugar. That's a good choice. Sports drinks work well, juices work well, regular Coca-Cola, crackers, cereal, something that's going to just digest fast and get out of the way. You don't want to be eating stuff that's going to sit in your stomach and not digest until after the workout's over. You need something that's going to move through quickly and easily. If you do that about 15 minutes before your workout, that's optimal.
I have a question here from Julie. If you eat extra carbs prior to exercise, do you not enter those carbs into Loop? If not, do you make a note in Night Scout so your reports are accurate in reporting?
Yeah, you wouldn't enter them into Loop, because then Loop is going to predict a rise, it's going to raise your basal, and it's going to offset the benefit that you would get. Notes for exercise are a challenge. When we download data, we've got so much glucose information available now. We got insulin information available. We got carb entries available. It's hard to integrate specific forms of exercise. So, we're always looking for a way to do that. You can sometimes get step counts into this, things like Tide Pool. But I have asked patients just to keep a running log of their workouts and what they did so that we can then go and look to see, what happened when they did that, what kind of outcomes there were.
Interesting question here. Thank you. When you're high for an extended period of time with a straight line, well, we know that straight line, and are not coming down, we also know that one. How do you recommend lowering your blood sugar? Do you use a temporary override, fake carbs? I'll throw in the question of Afrezza.
Walking.
Fias, but what do you recommend?
More often than not, those kind of stubborn highs are because of a site issue. So my recommendation is none of the above. I would change my infusion set. If you want to fix the problem and bring it down as fast as possible, yeah, Afrezza could do it. It works twice as fast as injected insulin, but you can also inject insulin into a muscle, flex the muscle a bit, and you'll also get it'll take half the time to do the same job. But fixing a problem like that, ultimately, you probably need a different infusion site. Move your pod, move your infusion set to a different spot, or the problem's going to just recur again.
Do you use Afrezza at all in those cases?
Personally, I have it. I haven't used it in a long time. Intramuscular injections are, they sting a little bit, but they do work. They used to tell people, don't do it, you'll get infections. I've never heard of anyone ever getting an infection from doing that. You make sure you use a clean syringe. That's all I would say. If you inject into a muscle, don't tempt fate. But a unit given into muscle will lower you as much as a unit given into the fat. It just does it twice as fast. And if you're a bit dehydrated from the high blood sugar, you're more likely to see results than if you give it into the fat layer. Because if you're dehydrated, you're not going to have very good blood flow to the fat layer, but you will have blood flow to your muscles.
So Luke's got a great follow-up to that, which is, how do you enter that into loop?
How do you enter the injection into
an intramuscular injection?
I believe there is a way. Does anybody know? I haven't done that in a while. Usually if I do it, I don't even bother entering it.
You can put in health on your, and it'll get picked up by Loop.
Wait, can you repeat that?
On the iPhone, there's the health app, and in the health app, you can enter in manual insulin information. So if you're doing something outside of Loop, and Loop will pick that up.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Ding, ding, there we go.
Yeah, 1 hour into our first training video in SoCal Loopers, I cover that.
Yep.
But intramuscular, like you said, will be faster. So in a sense, you'd be entering it, but it's not properly modeled, I guess. So I guess we'll see what happens.
At that point, you almost want to just say, screw the model because it ain't working.
Exactly, yeah. Maybe put half as much in there or something.
Yeah, or put a special, build a special model with a 3-hour duration of insulin curve on it.
If it's an IM shot, I would do even less than that. Usually it's cleared in about 90 minutes to 2 hours.
Yeah, at that point, you probably wouldn't want to enter it.
We have a psychosocial question, which are my favorite questions. So thanks, Becky. Is it common to be scared of exercise because you fear lows?
Yeah, I deal with patients a lot who want to work out, want to exercise, and are petrified about it. It's one of the main reasons a lot of people don't exercise. And cases like that, I'll recommend very conservative management techniques surrounding the workout. Even if they run high, I'm okay with that. We can always tighten up later. But I might have them exercise, after a meal, take 75% off their dose, whatever. If they're on loop, we could crank their target up to 180 2 hours beforehand. But yeah, it does happen. And sometimes people are so hypophobic that it keeps them from living normal, healthy lives.
This is a slight off topic, but because you are so tapped into the community and in development, do you have any updates on further loops coming onto the market, Beta Bionics or Omnipod, Horizon? Any news that we can prod out of you?
The only news I have is not good. For any of these products to come to market, they have to go through human studies, human factor studies, surveillance. And right now, none of that's happening because of the lockdowns. So everything is delayed. And I would not expect to see anything radically new, maybe until early next year. It's going to take a while to get past this now. Studies that were underway are on hold. I mean, it's going to take some time now. Horizon system, tide pool loop, Beta Bionics insulin only system, Medtronic's 780, and I guess Tandem's next iteration. It won't be right away, but they're already moving ahead with it. But right now, Loop is the best we've got because we don't have to go through all the human factor studies. We can, new iterations to the Loop app can come out and we can benefit from that, whereas everyone else is in a standstill.
Yeah, I had heard that Insulet had a delay on their one of their studies to make a correction in the software before COVID. So I just answered to someone, say, don't expect anything till 2021 or later, probably 2022. We also don't hear very much from Bigfoot Biomedical. I don't quite know what happened there, but
Bigfoot, I think, has put their closed loop system on the back burner. Last I heard, they were working on an integrated pen rather than a pump.
Yep.
So they've shifted gears a bit. I don't think we're going to see a system from them anytime soon. I mean, I was a bit suspicious when they partnered with Abbott's Libre system. I have a lot of concerns about the reliability and accuracy of that in people with type 1 who are at risk of hypoglycemia. So yeah, that's one I wouldn't be expecting anytime soon.
And back onto psychosocial, Kelly asks, are there any tips on trying to convince my 17-year-old daughter to loop? I built the loop, but can't get her to try it! Exclamation point.
Sure, tell her she can't use it. It's not allowed.
That works as a teenager, right? You ought to know. Yeah.
Well, I think something teenagers and adults have in common is they don't want to think about major change and doing anything forever. But we can often deal with a trial of something. So if you let someone know, let's just do this, a 2-week trial on it. If you don't like it, we go back to what you were doing before. And I used to have to convince people to try insulin pumps and CGMs by doing that. Say, okay, this Dexcom thing, just kind of try it for 2 weeks. You don't like it, throw it in the trash, you go back to finger sticks. I don't think a lot of people regretted doing that trial. And I think she'd feel the 17-year-old will probably feel the same way with Loop once they give it a try.
Okay, question from Jamie. I'm just reading it as we go. For exercise and treating lows, seems like a good option. I think I heard Gary say was to switch to open loop. This would allow for accurate reports by recording carbs for low treatments and no need to enter fake insulin. Is he on the right track?
Yeah, you can do that. You can also stay in loop and you just have to make sure you're entering less carb than you're actually eating. I wouldn't be as concerned about the accuracy of your historical records. If you don't want loop responding inappropriately, just put a different amount of carbs in than you're actually eating. That's not that big a deal, I don't think.
Yeah, or put them in after the fact if you want historical records.
Yep. From NS, which to me is Night Scout, but okay, from NS, how difficult is it to teach oneself to loop? Most people on this call are looping or have a child who's looping. So I think perhaps we're the wrong ones to say, because yes, we can do it. And we are not all technical geniuses. If you can read and you can reach out to a community, you can loop. But what are your thoughts when people come to you saying, how do I do this? Will you do it for me? How does this work?
Learning how to use it is a snap. You know, once you get it up and running, it runs. It's nothing you really have to learn. You know, the challenging part for a lot of people is building the app. People who are not comfortable with technology are often still challenged by that. We have, you know, documentation we've put together. There's stuff on the Looper site that walk people through that part of it. The troubleshooting after you're on loop can still be challenging to folks, but once they acquaint themselves with the Facebook community and know where to ask the right questions, it's fairly easy to deal with.
Okay, question from Sherry. I know she had sent this in earlier. I'm new to looping and doing much better, but still learning. I play tennis 2 to 3 times a week competitively and socially for 2 to 3 hours at a time. I saw a suggestion on not eating breakfast before exercise, and I've started doing that with better results, but darn, I get so hungry. I seem to have enough energy, but still not sure that this is the best plan. When I was just pumping and ready to eat after playing, I would always just bolus for carbs eaten, ignoring blood sugar so I wouldn't tank 4 hours later. With loop, I don't really see a good way to do that without doing math every time. I set a target for 140 to 160 an hour before playing, and sometimes I end up at 150 to 180 with playing and no food. Need to figure out something better. Any advice?
That's a long backstory.
Yes, it is.
You know, honestly, if anyone who's going to exercise for 2 or 3 hours should be eating or drinking something along the way. You need some fuel just to keep yourself running. It's just a matter of entering less carb. You don't have to do any math, but if you eat something beforehand, just enter less carbs so you get a smaller bolus. You know, if you eat 30 grams, put in 10 and see how that works. If you snack at the midway point and you have 20 grams, put in 5 or 10 and see how that works. Nothing more sophisticated than that you have to do. But to go that long during a workout, an exercise session, and not eating anything, I don't think that's a great idea. There's a reason you're hungry. Your body needs energy. So go ahead and have those carbs. Just enter less and let the system dose you accordingly.
And can I ask a question? So I have a really low basal rate, 0.35, and then during dawn phenomenon, which is 5 to 9.4. So I had been, when I was on my PDM, reducing my basal by 35% while I was playing tennis. But now I'm thinking, since you're saying I take such a little amount anyway, should I just not even mess with lowering the basal and just set my target a little bit tighter? Because I think because of the adrenaline, I'm tending to go up towards the end of the match.
Are you using the Omnipod or the Medtronic pump?
Omnipod.
A little different with the Medtronic because the basal delivers slightly different in smaller increments. Well, one thing you got to consider is what's your performance zone and what blood sugar level do you feel and perform the best during your session. And you got to try to aim for that. I disagree with people who drive their blood sugars really high to start a workout and then just let it drop, because they're only just passing through a quality zone blood sugar wise during that period of time. You should be able to start in a performance zone and maintain it throughout. There's nothing wrong with cutting the basal back. I mean, 0.35 is very different than a kid that's on 0.1 or 0.05. 0.35, yeah, you can see a nice reduction if you lower it by a third or by 50% ahead of time, and knowing you're going to need less insulin for quite a while. And if you need to, if you start to go down a little bit, you can always take a little bit of rapid acting carb. You don't have to enter that into loop. It doesn't need to know you're having that.
Going down doesn't seem to be the problem. It's more going up.
Less of a reduction would make sense then.
Okay, we got one more question from Sheila's husband. My blood sugar often spikes after meals, even though I pre-bolus 30 to 40 minutes early. The 6-hour projection will show in range, so no automatic bolus is given. If I manually bolus, the basals reduced, basically canceling my correction. Seems like it would be better to look at a shorter time frame than 6 hours and adjust basal based on that. Any thoughts on that one?
You might benefit from setting a shorter insulin profile. If it's figuring it's going to take 6 hours to get you back down, that might help. It might also be beneficial to actually use a faster insulin. FIASP has been around for a while now, and there have been mixed results in using it. It does have an earlier onset and an earlier peak. It's only about an 8 to 10 minute faster peak, but it can help reduce that post-meal spike that a lot of people experience. If you're already bolusing 15, 20, 30 minutes before you eat, you can't ask much more than that. But you can look at what kind of foods you're eating. If they're the type that digest really rapidly, these high glycemic index foods, think about making some substitutions and having some slower digesting foods instead. The timing of physical activity can also help, even if it's just a short walk, like walking a pet, doing some chores around the house. Doing those things right after eating slows down digestion a little bit and also helps the insulin absorb a little faster. So you get this combination that produces better post-meal patterns, don't spike quite as much. And if all else fails, you can also consider some of the medications that are used for slowing digestion. Similan is still available. Type 2s can get Ozempic and Trulicity, but type 1s can as well if your doctor goes to bat for you. Those are options, and they help slow down digestion to an extent.
Is a SNAP. Once you get it up.
Oops. Okay, we could keep going through this and more, but it's getting to your bedtime probably. Gary, I want to thank you so much for taking your time, maybe your workout time this evening.
I'm going to go work out now. I don't care.
There you go. Thank you for your wealth of knowledge and your years of experience. Every little bit helps, and really appreciate it. For those who are curious about how to loop, just come and ask us. We're really we're kind. We accept where everyone comes from. And I just want to give you all a pitch. You haven't seen it yet, but on Sunday afternoon, we'll have a presentation by Dana Roseman, who now works for Gary. She's a type 1, she's a looper, and she's I believe a clinical nutritionist, to talk about food, bolusing strategies, and loop. And we've had Jenny Smith do this in the past, and it helps so much to even just hear it again and again. Gary, thank you for having such a good staff. Really helpful.
I have 6 clinicians, all with type 1, and 5 out of 6 are loopers. If that says something, I don't know.
You bet.
But if anybody's looking for a tune-up or any kind of assistance with their management, feel free to reach out. We've been doing remote care for 15 years. We're a little ahead of the curve when it comes to this type of treatment.
Thank you. Gary's company is Integrated Diabetes Solutions. You can find him on the web. You can send him messages, tell him you saw this. Follow him on Instagram. That way you'll see all their activity challenges, which are interesting. He has a fabulous newsletter with a quiz every month, which you might win something if you ever get it in before anyone else. So I keep trying.
I'll tell you, This month's quiz, you'll see it's just going to post tomorrow, is how many Riley links have been produced and shipped since they started making them.
Whoa, you're right down.
I got the exact number. Don't go calling them and asking. I told them don't tell anybody, but that's the
Well, if
quiz.
you see anybody was on here, you just disqualify us. We're ahead of that one. Thank you so very much. Anyone has more questions, we can get them to Gary. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Have a good day wherever you are. And just come back and visit us. Thank you again.
Thank
Can
you.
anybody grab the
Thank
new
you.
Riley link, by the way, the new upgrade? Wondering what your testimony is on that. New charging system, waterproof. Yeah.
Oh, the new loop?
Yeah,
No,
New-
Joanne, do you have the new Riley
I
link?
have it. Yeah, it's a little bit larger than the old, like Robert Silver's case.
Yep.
It sits on a charger at nighttime, so it just charges. I haven't tried dipping it in water because I just have no need to do that.
Yeah.
It
What's the
works
charge
fine.
time, would you say?
I'm sorry?
What's the charge time? Isn't it like just 10 to 30 minutes? Isn't it like a rapid charge system?
I believe it is. I just leave it on there overnight. I've always charged overnight,
Yeah.
and I've had absolutely no trouble with it. So it's pretty slick. It's a little bit larger. Yeah, I like it. Is it necessary or worth? I think if I had a kid, I would probably use it in case they drop it in the toilet.
Can I ask you, when mine is charging, it doesn't loop. Does yours do that?
Yes, it's supposed to continue to loop while
Okay.
it's charging.
Should I contact them and ask if it's faulty or something?
Yeah, give Jeremy Lucas a jingle, and that will help you. He'll give you some feedback. I've not had a problem.
Okay, I was so curious because it doesn't charge. Anyway, okay, it doesn't work.
Yeah,
But don't ask Jeremy how many Riley links they've sold.
that's right. We're not allowed to do that.
No cheating.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Have a really good evening. It was really good to see you all. Be safe. Be healthy. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for sharing. Appreciate it.
Thank you.